confession that I'm not really a very big fan of a lot of Indian writing in English. Because, the fact is that most of the books that are like, you go to a bookshop and they're placed right in the front, are the same to literature as the movies are to cinema. They make a lot of money and they actually leave you with nothing. And the few books that I have liked, the one before this was again written by a journalist who's also an investigative journalist, and you could see the experience of that. And the same is when I started to read, I picked up this book, and to confess to you also, I've not finished it because I've been mixing my movie and while traveling I've been reading it. The way he starts with getting into the mind of Hani Kumar, and he starts, I have dealt with FRO. I was married to Kalki, who had to deal with FROs. And I know in my movie Yellow Boots, you see the whole world of FRO right at the beginning of it, and the way it is, and that whole sense of power over somebody who is like, that whole sense of superiority in that moment that they feel over, especially when they're dealing mostly with white skin, that suddenly they start feeling like, oh, either she is here to get her visa extended, or he is here to get, and suddenly they have the superiority thing that comes into them, and they start becoming this animal. And for me, the kind of world that CP creates, and he gets into the heads of these people. You get into that world, and sometimes it also confuses you because he puts you in the shoes of Hani Kumar. And you have this kind of sympathy and conflict, and you start feeling where he's coming from, and you see that the world he operates in, it justifies because relatively he's less corrupt compared to others. And that's the magic that the book should do. And this does. I'm trying to read the end, and I'm in between things. And the world that Miriam kind of gets herself into, this whole labyrinth of, like this Kafkaesque labyrinth, in the sense she's going through exactly what probably Joseph K. was in that, and she can't decipher that world. She doesn't know what is going on. She knows what she wants. She knows what she doesn't want. She's caught in that situation and her things. And, it is just, it's like what somebody said in the beginning, that you don't know whether it's a thriller or it's a literary fiction. And the way it's written is so believable and real, because when Suchitra and Denzel were reading here, and you could feel it unfolding in front of you, and when Denzel spoke that line, that is your responsibility, the lady sitting right next to me, she quietly said, so? She was reacting to it. I think that's the power of writing, that's the power of good writing. And I'm so glad that there are books being written like that in English in India, because I seriously, I've been very disappointed with a lot, because there's very few, and they come after long periods of time, that you see a good book written by an Indian in English about the world. The one before this I read was Akhil Sharma's book, which was probably not written here, and then Somnath Bhattacharya. I think in between I've not read many, or maybe I missed some. But I'm so glad that I was here to release this book, and I wish I had finished it. I think I will finish it the next, just another 2 hours, I think.
Thank you so much, Anurag. Anurag, unlike you, I finished the book. And guess when I got the copy of the book? Last night at 10 o'clock. Okay, and I think that speaks volumes. And before that I was very worried, because I called CP and I asked him, CP, what would you classify this book as? Would you call it a thriller? He paused for a minute. Okay, and I don't know why thriller writers don't want to be called, thriller writers. But CP turned around and said, it's a literary fiction. But so I was wondering how, okay, fine, it's a literary fiction, but it's a thriller too. And, well, he didn't agree. But to my mind, I finished about 210 pages or so last night, and the balance I finished this morning. And to me, I have never read any other book so fast in my life. I think that is volume. When you read the book, there's a character called Hani Kumar. And if you read the book, and the character really gets into you. And he's a bit of, how do I put it? He's a bit of Ranjit, Gulshan Grover, Ajit, and Gabbar Singh combined. You know, can you just imagine the power of that particular guy? He's a mixed breed of all these four guys and doesn't let you go. And that's the power of this guy, and the power of the narration in this book is just too good. Despite the language, which is very flamboyant, the story moves extremely fast, and I would say that each one of you should not only read this, but probably go back and...
Sentence has to lead to something. You know, there is a thing, what is going to happen next is a problem with me. You know, I have no idea what's going to happen next, but then I'm curious. Hadal actually comes from a Greek word called Hades. Is the abode of the dead. It's another world. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of this Hadal is that there's a particular marine region in the sea, which is about 23,000 feet deep, and where the opacity and the density and pressure are really high, and so are currents, which is what happens between people. You know, I'm finding more and more that people are constantly wearing masks, and there's, as things go by, as years go by, I realize that there's not much difference between the mask you wear and the face that you have grown. So, you know, there is something about that. So it is about people, it's about what we do to each other, is how we are talking to each other but thinking something else. It's about the currents which we issue from our, well, almost a non-existent heart, and, you know, catch everybody in that flow.
When I was reading the text, and underfucked. So, and he says that balance that, and you had your money's worth.
Yeah, I think I think it's well put. That's all I can say. Well, India, and the moral condition, you know, the kind of things we ask of other people, comes from that actually. You know, it is. You know, the entire thing is a very defensive posture. You know, and we keep talking about, you know, why you should be like Ram, Maryada, Purushottam, and it's all I would think. I hope, you know, my former management is not here because I might be taken to court on that. The Maryada Purushottam himself is an extremely defensive person. You know, if you read Ramayana, I mean, how can you desert your beautiful, you know, sensitive, sincere wife because the public perception will damage you? I mean, how do you do that? How do you say that, you know, I'll let her walk through the fire, man, because I need to appear as good? I mean, there is... Yeah, well, I do. Now I know. This is the whole point. The point is that things are so complex and undercut. That's what we're talking about.
With that declaration, would you want to... So do you, which are not particularly complimentary, so aren't you worried that this will create a fair bit of ruckus, raise a lot of mark, or is that the intent?
I'm hoping it does. But apart from that fact, and apart from that, I really have a problem with quite a few things which happen right in the midst of us. See, you know, the way I look at this whole thing, you know, writing just now, the invented word, is actually going through one of its most critical periods because, you know, unlike earlier times, you had through history periodic interjections into language, whether it's Shakespeare or, you know, Euripides, or if you're talking about the modern George Orwell. There are periodic interjections into language in terms of new words, new blood coming in, right? Now we are living in a place where technology has sort of killed it, and the reason why, what technology has done is actually to give you the sound of the meaning. You know, so you won't say ho, you will say hl. You won't say charger, you will say chgr. You know, it's taken for granted what you mean. So we live in a taken for granted situation where
the idea of what the Indian male today is like, you know, oversexed and underfucked. And I absolutely agree with it.
You actually swallowed the second part of the sentence.
No, and I think my question, because, you know, I'm going on a complete tangent. You know, when I was reading the book, it took me into the zone. a lot of these, Ariel Dorfman who wrote Death and the Maiden and the books of Ariel Dorfman, you know, it has a kind of a claustrophobia, your book. It creates that kind of a claustrophobia of that red tape, of that world, the government-owned world where one has to pass through. Kind. I think, and that comes from, in the sense, that's why I asked you, I said, did you work on this case? Because that whole, the character study, the way it comes, it seems like I've lived in that world and you've probably worked for these people and you have had these conversations with them and you have heard them out and their own justification of why and who they are.
You know, it's a very astute comment. I tell you why. In the mid-90s, I was a reporter with one of the papers here called Metropolitan Saturday, from which days my friend Seema Kandar is here. So when this happened, primarily I think in south of India, Kerala actually, I went to Trivandrum to do a reporting on this thing. And
it's a very interesting characterization, not only him, but all the other characters as well, about general...
Exactly, you answered my question, you know. I actually come across some people and I'm going to make you a villain.
Now you know your secret. You know, the thing is, I don't believe there's any much distinction between imagination.
Most of my characters are always borrowed. I don't know, I think it always depends on the trigger. Something triggers of the movie, and then most of the characters are actually borrowed, and I borrow. I'm very bad with giving them names. Like I was so happy when Hani Kumar. How do you think of Hani Kumar? You know, I'm very bad with names. I always borrow names, and I borrow characteristics from people, and I work very closely with the actors. So my character is not really completely on the paper ever. It's there on the paper, it's kind of a suggestion, and then I start meeting actors. And when I meet actors, and suddenly some actor kind of works for me, that's when the character from the page, it becomes the character.
You know,
that's how the two come together.
You know, one of the things I'm noticing, because I've just done one script for Anand Mahadevan, Gaur Hari Dastan, and it was my first experience, and I loved it. You know, you give one line and you do 93 scenes out of it, and Anand just gets the hell out of the place. So you have to do 93 scenes, and then you will say these are not good scenes. This is a good scene. I mean, like, what the hell is that? You know. So anyway, but one thing I'm noticing about the cinema world, and I know I'm going away from Hadal, but still I think I'm very curious to know. One thing I want to know is that unlike, say, Alejandro, for example, or you know, there are any number of people actually. Bergman, for example, Tarkovsky, for example, Kurosawa, a great example. Why is one afraid of expressing one's own problems in visual phrases?
I don't know. For me, it's an absolute go-go land. It's not no-go land. That's exactly where I go always. For me, I always interpret everything based on my own personal experience. Even something which is completely, I've not even lived in that world, or something that I've heard of, I interpret it based on how I've lived it. Like for example, the entire gangs of Wasipur. Now, when I don't know how to shoot in Wasipur, it did not lend itself cinematically. So I went back to where I grew up, and I shot the film in exactly the house you see that Manoj Bajpayee lives in is the house I grew up in. So, you know, I go back to my roots and interpret the entire story based on my experience growing up in North India. So all those things, and I get into it personally, and for me, my most key thing is the actors. My script is never independent of the actors. I work very closely with actors. And when the actor comes in is when the character actually finds body. And that's why I'm very particular about casting. I'll never cast somebody who doesn't fit the character. So, and that's when the film starts evolving. And for me, the film is a constant evolving process. It's never finished with the script. It's never finished with the shoot. It only finishes on the day of the release. So it is a constant, and that's why it's like most of my films, there's not a single film where I remember I spent less than 9 months to a year on post-production after finish shooting. Which is why I also deal with the controversy, something is wrong with the film. That's why it's pushing.
Interesting. Taking forward Anurag's point.
I'll just tell you that, you know, there are 2-3 things which I keep thinking to myself, and one is that as a society, we live in a world without myths. You know, we have to have mythology, right? So that thing is over. Talking about repeat radio and maybe an unusual set of poems with a little bit of prose involved, and after that, what else?
I'm sure the 700 pages will be over in a night. So, congratulations, questions.
Getting cracked out of life. It occurs to me that man is known as a social animal, and I love that phrase that you use, the almost non-existent heart, because earlier you were talking about masks. Would you say that my heart is not?
Anurag, when and how did your association with CP begin?
I think after I wrote this book, I got a phone call. That's where our association began. From this book. And everyone should read this book.
CP, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
You spoke about Maryada Purushottam Ram not being Maryada Purushottam because of the cruelties inflicted on Sita. I have read a version of Ramayana which says that the incarnation of Lord Vishnu in the body of Rama ended the moment he killed Ravana, and the divine form of Mahavishnu was revealed to him. So post that, Rama lived like a common man.
Who wrote this?
I don't remember the name of the author, but that's a possibility.
You have to give me the source.
Possibly CP.
I really don't know how to that wonder and cynicism and it can coexist.
That one moment where we actually moved, it is such a gradual thing. So that evolution is very, I think that is what Honeycomb was trying to do actually. You know, that is.
It actually lends itself beautifully to a movie.
Would you like to produce on that?
See the advantage, sorry. I said it lends itself beautifully to a movie and that to a very controlled budget.
Unfortunately, the rights have already been sold.
Anurag, you also said that you were busy mixing, because of which you couldn't read the book fully. How is the mixing of Bombay Velvet going?
You will know it soon, in a month.
There has been mixed reactions about the trailer. What do you have to say? Are you happy with those?
Yeah, there are mixed reactions about everything. No, we are a country that puts its sabji and dal and chawal together. We eat mixed food. We make khichdi. Everything is mixed.
What do you have to say about the new ruling by the Maharashtra government about getting Marathi cinema into prime time? You are in agreement with that?
I did agree to that.
I think let's talk about the book.
मैं किताब जैसी जा रही मैंने पहली चीज इनके कान में ही बोली थी मेरे को बस खत्म कर लेने दो तब तक किसी से राइट्स की बात मत करना इट इज कम्प्लीटली लेजेंड बहुत कुछ समझ आएगा हम जिस समय में रह रहे हैं आपको उसके बारे में बहुत कुछ समझ में आएगा किताब लिख सकता ना तो मैं पता नहीं क्या हो जाता मैं नहीं लिख सकता हूँ स्क्रिप्ट लिखना आता है किताब लिखने मेरी हिम्मत नहीं है किताब लिखने की मैंने ट्राई किया है और मैं फेल हुआ हूँ Thank you. Pleasure. Yeah? I'll take it. We got the Anurag, it's great to meet you. Nice meeting you. हाँ, मैं इसे पकड़ा रखूँगा. हाँ, चलो. नहीं, go ahead.
You said that you're not a big fan of Indian writers. Indian writers write.
No.
was that? वो clarification
नहीं वो कुछ नहीं था। मैं बोला कि हमारे इंग्लिश में अधिकतर किताबें जो लिखी जाती हैं वो खामखा लिखी जाती है क्योंकि बिक रही हैं, और उन किताबों से ऐसा भी होता है कि बहुत सारे लोगों को किताब पढ़ के लगता है कि काफी पढ़ लिख गए, ऐसा बहुत चलता है।
But if Chetan Bhagat is liked by masses, what's wrong?
There's nothing wrong with that. Right. I'm saying, have you seen what kind of writing is there in the bookshop? First go and read all sorts of writing. ना आप जाके देखो कितनी सारी किताबें, आजकल हर दूसरे मकान में रहने वाला आदमी इंग्लिश राइटर है।
Okay, so that should not be happening is what you're saying, or
No, I'm not giving you any kind of a controversial statement that you can make a headline into.
No, but
I'm saying, what do you say? Do you read books?
I do, yes.
Huh? What is your opinion about it?
Well, it's good thing.
हाँ, जो भी चीज बिकती है सब बिकनी चाहिए, करेक्ट है ना?
उसकी सबकी एक ऑडियंस होती है सर।
हाँ, सबकी ऑडियंस होती है, करेक्ट बात है। फिर सवाल क्यों पूछ रहे हो? फिर तुम्हें जवाब मालूम है?
सर नहीं, आपके मुझे सर
जवाब नहीं, मुझे बोलना, मैं साफ बोल चुका हूँ। हमारी कंट्री में मीडियोक्रिटी बहुत हद से ज्यादा है, चाहे वो राइटिंग में हो, चाहे वो सिनेमा में हो, चाहे वो किसी भी चीज में हो, चाहे वो मीडिया में हो। सारी मीडिया में भी जितनी मीडियोक्रिटी उतनी मीडियोक्रिटी बाहर की मीडिया में भी नहीं है। समझ रहे हो? तो इस माहौल में आपको जब रह के रहना है तो आपको अपनी चॉइसेस खुद करनी पड़ेगी। आप क्या पढ़ना चाहते हो, आप क्या नहीं पढ़ना चाहते हो। खत्म।
ये ओवरसेक्स्ड और अंडरफक्ड का मतलब फिल्मों में कितना है?
वो जिस राइटर ने लिखा था किताब में, अब ये सवाल उनसे पूछे।
मतलब आपने सहमत हैं इनसे?
हाँ,
मतलब वो टर्म्स
मैं उनकी हर चीज से सहमत हूँ, उनकी किताब से सहमत हूँ। आप जो है दूसरों के शब्द मेरे मुंह में क्यों ठूसना चाह रहे हैं, मैं ये जानना चाहता हूँ। नहीं, आप इस तरह से सवाल करेंगे, मैं आज मैं आपका नाम लेके आपको बैन करूंगा, क्योंकि आप जबरदस्ती के सवाल पूछते हैं और जबरदस्ती आप उसको कंट्रोवर्सी बनाते हैं, और जबरदस्ती आप सवाल का मतलब क्या? आप सवाल का मतलब बताइए, आप अपनी शक्ल दिखाई मीडिया के सामने, आइए इधर आइए, ये आप सवाल पूछिए मुझसे। चलिए खड़े हो गए, अभी सवाल पूछिए, बताइए।
So the question is, there is something called as oversexed and underfunded written in the book by Mr. C.P. Surendran. So there was a discussion happening.
आप बताइए पहले इसका मतलब क्या होता है?
So no, the essence of the fact is, he said that in India, every audience is oversexed and underfucked.
It doesn't say that in the book. Have you read the book?
No, that is what I'm asking.
Have you read the book?
The discussion that happened here.
No. Have you read the book?
No, I have not. I will
first read the book. No, then ask the question.
Correct, sir.
Never ask the question without reading the book. ये वही चीज है। आप बिना फिल्म देखे पूछते हैं आपकी फिल्म ऐसी क्यों है?
सर नहीं,
आप पहले अपना इन्वेस्टिगेशन करिए, किताब पढ़िए और फिर आके सवाल पूछिए, मैं आपके सवाल का जवाब दूंगा।
Correct. I understand. There was a reading session that happened. Based on that, I asked the question.
In the reading session, that word was never used.
So no, in this session,
in that discussion, it happened. Who discussed it?
CP
Go and ask
discussed
him.
it. Correct. I will ask him. I just asked him.
Why are you asking me this question?
Sir, no, you
So
can.
that you can make a headline.
No, sir.
Shut up. मैं जा रहा हूँ। तुम्हारी वजह से क्या हो चुका ना हमारा, बात करने का मन नहीं करता कहीं।
अनुराग, आप हमेशा इतना अग्रेसिव हो जाते हैं,
क्योंकि आप लोग करते हैं।
नहीं,